Alright, so in this video I'm going to give you guys a build that you can use along with some gameplay for each class to farm your Adept Wild style grenade launchers this week. The grenade launcher got a big rework, so I'm going to go into some of the roles that I was going for next. It ended up happening that I had really bad RNG. If you guys paid attention to my last community post, you'll see I got on my Warlock, for the first exotic bond that I got, it was Synthos and Necrotics, which I was thrilled about. And then the next day I got Euphony to drop on only my 4th witness clear. So I thought maybe I would have some continuous good RNG going forwards, but I guess I exhausted all of my good luck because I've ran this GM at least 10 times on my Warlock. I think eight or 9 times on my Titan and 4 or 5 times on my Hunter, and I barely got one roll with basically what I was looking for. So like I said, I'll talk about that next, but in this video I'm going to be doing a build for each class that covers that features, I should say, the exotic class item, right? So I'll get into each build as we go forward. Alright, so here's the reason for the farm this week. It is the Wild Style Grenade Launcher. This thing released last season, I believe, along with the Slammer as the 2 Nightfall weapons, and it was pretty underwhelming. There was a lot of hype around it because we've got actually, do I have it on me? The Wild Style Grenade Launcher was, the only double fire frame that came from Spire the Watcher. This thing's been great. It has auto-loading holster, Vorpal weapon, disorienting spike. So this is just all around a good energy slot blinding GL for utility purposes, and then you can also have it function into a damage rotation on a boss. With the double fire frame, it actually allows this thing to do more damage than other breach loaded grenade launchers because of the double grenades, and it also means that you could blind a wider radius of enemies, especially at a greater distance, because the spread on the 2 grenades, it spreads out over distance, so you can actually blind large areas with this grenade launcher. Also, being in the energy slot makes it perfect for builds that revolve around a kinetic weapon. So if you're really leaning heavily into a primary kinetic or an exotic kinetic, or if you're on strand or stasis and you're using strand or stasis weapons, then your energy slot can fill the utility role of something like a blinding GL. So that's typically where I use this. And so the hype with the wild style grenade launchers that it is basically the solar version of Wilderflight. Now, like I said, it was underwhelming when it first came out. It only had Envious Assassin and Surrounded basically going for it. It had Incandescent, but it basically had no auto-loading holster, so no real consistent, reliable way to reload the mag, which is annoying. If you're using this for utility, you pretty much have to have it reloaded, right? So now Bungie went ahead and they gave this thing a glow up. They gave it reconstruction. They changed some of the other perks too, like they got rid of permeability and attrition orbs, which were basically useless perks, and they gave it bait and switch. They gave it Vorpal weapon, right? So I've been hunting for a disorienting reconstruction. Those are the top 2 priorities right there. All right, because obviously disorienting is the whole purpose of using a blinding GL, is to do crowd control, and then occasionally burst down majors, champions, maybe a little bit of boss DPS here and there, and then obviously crack solar shields as well. Comes in handy for that. So now we've got reconstruction, which is basically better than auto-loading holster. It's a little bit slower, but you pretty much always got at least 1 or 2 in the mag, and the fact that you can shoot 2 at a time means that you can totally control a whole room of enemies, like multiple spawns, because of having 2 in the mag at once, right? Because reconstruction not only auto-loads but overflows the mag, right? So reliably every 3 seconds or so, you can blind enemies, right? You never have to reload. The damage perk doesn't matter as much because, like I said, it's mainly for utility. So you could just kind of deal with whatever you get. Like, I'm happy enough to accept One for All. Ideally, I'd like Vorpal Weapons so that I could use it more reliably on Majors and Champions, like I was saying, just for that consistent 15% extra damage. One for All can proc every now and then, but it's not something that you can count on. If you do get it to proc, it's 35% extra damage, so it is basically the highest damage perk outside of Surrounded, right? But it is pretty situational. So anyways, that's the role that I'm going for, is Disorienting Reconstruction, and ideally like Handling as a masterwork, but I think I ended up getting Blast Radius, which is useless. So this is like a I mean, I've got Hard Launch, so that's good. It's basically a 3 out of 5, and it's good enough to serve the purpose. So like I said, after doing 20 or so Grandmasters, this is basically the best I got. And the only other one that I kept here is Envious with Incandescent. Unfortunately, like, I wish it had Reconstruction, because I was thinking Incandescent would be great, because especially with Reconstruction, you can easily get off some incandescent explosions while blinding enemies. So that could be pretty good. But I think what I might end up doing with this is I will use this on builds where I can afford to use Solar Holster on my legs as a mod, so that I can basically give this thing a pseudo auto-loading holster, and I can pair that with something like a solar machine gun, like Fixed Odds, you know, some kind of heavy weapon that I don't want to reload, so that I can have that leg solar holster mod being put to use on 2 fronts instead of just one, because sometimes it's a lot to ask to use a mod like that on your legs, where that space is being demanded by stuff like surges and recuperation, and scavenger mods. So sometimes it's a little bit hard to fit in something like Solar Holster. But like I said, if you're going to use a machine gun, then you could pair that with this. And I mean, it does have Envious Assassin too, so you could, as long as you're only pulling it out occasionally and you're sure to get kills in between, you can have this thing auto-loaded basically all the time, right, depending on your kills. And you can get up to 3 in the mag, which is kind of cool. So I'll probably masterwork this eventually. So there's my 2 roles. Now let's get into the builds. All right, so here's the Warlock build that I'm using. And by the way, I'm going to be time stamping all classes as far as the build breakdown and gameplay. I'm not going to talk too much over the loadout screen here. I'm just going to cover the concept of the build real quick, and then we'll get into the gameplay, and I'll discuss more about the build and how to play it over the gameplay, right? But you can check the timestamps if you're just looking for your Hunter build or your Titan build, right? So here's the Warlock build. Like I said, I'm using my first exotic class item that I got on Warlock, Solecism, with Osteostriga, right? So I've got Necrotic Grips and Synthos. So I wanted to use a Weapon of Sorrow, because this is a good way to capitalize on necrotics at range. And then obviously I want a good melee as well, and a good play style that can allow for me to get up close and be surrounded by enemies and use that melee to my advantage, for the extra damage from Synthos, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can build into this class item. You can use a glaive, right, which I highly recommend if you're maybe in certain GMs, but I wouldn't necessarily say in Fallen Saber. So for this, I ended up using Lightning Surge, right? Because just like on Titan with Consecration and Frenzy Blades, where you can get 3 charges and then you can just spam Consecration with Transcendence, you could do the same thing with Lightning Surge on Warlock, right? You use Lightning Surge with Arcane Needle, that gives you 3 charges, and this is a Jolt on hit, which means that you can stun Overload champions, which is pretty useful. And you're going to do a lot of AoE damage with the Jolt, and at the same time proc poison from Necrotic Grips and Synthoceps for the extra damage. So this is quite a lot of fun. I was a little bit apprehensive to use it at first because, I've never really used Lightning Surge. I just never wanted to on Stormcaller, because Electrostatic Mind and Arc Soul are just better. But now that we have Prismatic and we have 3 charges and we have Transcendence allowing us to spam it, it's actually very good in combination with Synthos and Necrotics, right? So that's basically the concept there. So I'll cover more about it in the gameplay. Alright, so this is about 9 minutes of gameplay here, so if you want to just get straight to Titan Hunter, just skip ahead. But we could talk a little bit more about the build here over some of the gameplay. So, as far as the Warlock goes, one of the main fragments that you're going to want to use if you're going to lean into a Weapon of Sorrow is Facet of Grace, because the thing with Transcendence is, or with prismatic builds, is you kind of need light and dark spam, right? You need some way to spam both types of damage so that you can get your Transcendence. And you definitely do want your Transcendence, especially with an ability spam build like this with Lightning Surge, kind of like Consecration. You can really just spam it over and over again and do a ton of damage and room clearing with Transcendence, right? So Facet of Grace, while you can build up your Transcendence with kinetic weapons without the help of any dark or light damage types, it takes a long time still, right? So you get a little bit of both with kinetic weapons, but with Facet of Grace you get a lot of both sides of your meter, right? It builds it up equally, and I found with this build that I was getting Transcendent very quickly with Facet of Grace. So that is one of the priority fragments that you're going to want to use if you're going to use a Weapon of Sorrow. Obviously, with Necrotic Grips, you don't necessarily need to use a Weapon of Sorrow, right? You can just lean, full on into a melee build or a glaive build and spread poison that way, but this is just the way I wanted to play it, was with Osteostriga. And keep in mind, because we've got anti-barrier SMGs, Osteostriga is taking care of barrier shields for us, right? And piercing all shield types. But yeah, the fact that it can break barriers is very good. One of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we get our Bleak Watcher turrets out as regularly as possible, right? One thing that I'm doing to help get my abilities back faster, while just without being Transcendent, is Facet. I think it's Facet of Balance. It's the fragment that gives you grenade energy with darkness damage, and it gives you melee energy with light damage, right? And because we're using a kinetic weapon, it's not necessarily always maxed out. We're not using Facet of Balance to its full potential because we're using a kinetic weapon, but we still are dealing light damage and dark damage, right? So we're dealing light damage from Lightning Surge, we're dealing dark damage from Bleak Watcher, occasionally with Wild Style, right? With Solar Grenade Launcher, we're dealing light damage, and the grenade launcher, or the rocket launcher as well. So yeah, as long as we can have our Bleak Watcher out, that's going to allow us to basically do our slide in to get that Lightning Surge, right? Because the thing is, if you're going to use Synthos with Necrotics, you're going to have to take that risk to get surrounded and get up close to the enemies, right? If you don't want to do that, then there's no point in using Syntheseps, right? So this is where Lightning Surge makes a lot of sense with Bleak Watcher specifically, right? And one of the things that I went back and forth with a lot in my own head was Devour, right? Feed the Void versus Bleak Watcher, right? And it is a toss-up. It's really up to you. It's just that I find Bleak Watcher is going to allow you to control the group of ads that you plan to take a risk on going out into the middle of, right? You're going to go out into the middle of a bunch of enemies, then you better make sure that you can do it safely, where Devour, yes, will heal you on kill. It's not going to help you get there, right? It's not going to help you get to the kill. Bleak Watcher is going to help you get access to those enemies safely so that you can get the kill. Also, there is actually a fragment called Facet of Blessing that can basically give you what Devour has to offer on melee kills. It gives you health regen, right? So it's not like a full cure or full restoration of your health bar, but it does heal you, which is kind of nice. But you can also use stuff like Recuperation and Heavy-Handed. So you go in for the melee kill, you produce an Orb of Power, you pick up the orb, you get health back, right? So there's ways to get around not having Devour, and Devour is really good in stuff like dungeons and raids and normal content with lots of enemies that are fairly easy to kill, where you can just keep chaining those kills to reliably keep your Devour going. But in Grandmasters, that's not always possible, right? And especially sometimes with other players, like if they take your kill, then you don't get any healing. So that's kind of the debate that I had going on there, and I ended up just sticking with Bleak Watcher. Although if you don't want to use Bleak Watcher and you want to use Devour, then that frees up your grenade slot, so you can use something like a Vortex Grenade with Facet of Dominance for Weaken, right? And then you can also apply Weaken on your Transcendent Grenade. So there's definitely some upsides to using Devour. Also, like using a Vortex Grenade is going to do a lot of light-based damage, which is going to feed into your melee, right? So you can really go either way. It's just for GMs specifically, having a Bleak Watcher turret is very nice. It's also going to allow you to apply that Darkness debuff regularly so that your Lightning Surge can actually do more damage when you use it, right? So like right here. Another thing to consider is like the super I'm using, right? So I'm using Song of Flame here instead of Nova Bomb, right? Ideally, I'd prefer to use Nova Bomb because it's just Nova Bomb got buffed and it just does an insane amount of damage. Like you can stun an Overload and Nova Bomb them and they're dead. Whereas using Song of Flame, you're going to basically burn through your entire super just to like take care of a barrier champion. So I'm not a huge fan of Song of Flame in this context. However, it gives you a ton of damage resistance. It makes you radiant. I believe it gives your allies some benefits as well. So you can really use it to tank a ton of damage, get off some reses for your teammates. Just very good roaming super, right? So nothing against Song of Flame specifically, but it does match the Surge this week as well. So that was kind of part of my reasoning for using it. I'm not using Facet of Purpose, so picking up Orbs of Power is not giving me restoration anyways, because I'm not using that fragment. So my super only matters for the Surge, and it matters for in some instances like pairing it with harmonic mods on as far as my combat mods. So like I think I'm using Harmonic Siphon here so that my grenade launcher can give me Orbs of Power for only 1 energy. Simple stuff like that. You'll notice that I'm also using a Bump in the Night rocket launcher. I've got a couple of these, and I specifically wanted a chill clip weapon in my heavy slot so that I can have an alternative way to stun Overload champions, because again here I'm not using any Overload weapon, so I'm relying on Lightning Surge for overloads and Chill Clip on my rocket launcher, and that's basically it, right? So that's why I've got auto loading holster and Chill Clip on Bump in the Night. Yeah, so that pretty much covers most of the considerations for the build. There's a couple different ways to play this build. So one of the big things I've noticed with Transcendence is, or with Prismatic, is you've got like 2 different play styles, right? You've got your gameplay loop that covers you while you're Transcendent, and then you've got a gameplay loop for when you're not Transcendent, right? Because you've got different grenades, you've got different damage resists, so there's different ways to play. So with this build specifically, when I'm at range, like namely in the boss fight here, it's not wise to go out into the middle of everything, even while Transcendent. So I'll usually hang back here by a pillar and then just throw my needles out and allow my needles to do necrotic damage, right? Poison damage over time. I don't really care if Synthos isn't working for me here. I can proc Synthos when it's time to just nuke the boss at the end, right? But yeah, you want to use your Arcane Needle if you have to stay back at range. And the Arcane Needle is very good for pairing with Facet of Dawn, right? So Facet of Dawn only gives you like 5 seconds of Radiant, so it's not great. But when you've got 3 Arcane Needles, it is pretty good, right? Especially when you're at range, because it means you're using your weapons as well, right? So that's basically it for the Warlock part. I'll go into Hunter next. Alright, so for my Hunter build here, this is a Fire and Ice, Stasis and Solar, Shatter, Ignition inspired build. I've been having a lot of fun with these styles of builds ever since ever since I unlocked my hunter on Prismatic, and I got this nice cloak to go with this build with renewal grasps and wormhusk crown. So this just provides a lot of survivability that the Prismatic Hunter subclass doesn't necessarily have access to, outside of going invisible with Stylish Executioner, Combination Blow. Unless you're going to play into the same build that you've probably already seen 1,000 times on YouTube, then this is a different style of gameplay that you can play at range. You can do a lot of ability spam that isn't just dodge and punch and go invisible, right? And so Renewal Grasps allows you to build up damage resistance in your Dusk-filled grenades, and Wormhusk Crown gives you a healing bump whenever you dodge, which is quite nice. And ironically, these are the only 2 exotics I ever really use on Revenant, on Stasis Hunter, like previous to the final shape. So I thought it was, just kind of perfect that I got them both on the same cloak. And so I'm running mostly Stasis abilities here, right? And obviously Facet of Ruin, right? Gunpowder Gamble with Winter Shroud. So really everything is just focused on ignitions and shatter, right? So I'm using a Chill Clip sniper rifle that can stun overloads and barriers, and then I'm using Dragon's Breath for even more ignitions. That's basically the concept, so I'll go into the gameplay next and talk about it a little bit more there. All right, so I think we skipped the first encounter here. I think somebody had just typed in chat they're going to cheese the Warsat, which is fine. I generally like to play the whole GM just legit so I can actually, play the game. But, I get a lot of people want to get it done sooner, so that's fine. So we're in this second encounter here to start things off. And one of the coolest things about Prismatic Hunter, or most surprising I should say, is how spammable Gunpowder Gamble is. I know it got a buff like even before Prismatic was released. I think in Season of the Wish it got a buff, but still, like compared to Knock 'em Down and whatever the other solar aspect on Gunslingers, I can't even remember right now. A lot of these aspects that we have on Prismatic are just kind of neglected aspects from the core subclasses, but Bungie's made a way on Prismatic to just make them spammable and make them better, and put this whole gameplay loop into use for them, where you're not really sacrificing anything by using them. In fact, it's just it just benefits you. So Gunpowder Gamble is really good. It's like an automatic ignition. The size of the ignition is massive. It's super fun to just shoot it out of the air, blow stuff up. So yeah, I'm definitely a fan. Now you'll notice here that I'm using Marksman's Dodge instead of Gambler's Dodge, and the reason for that is well, it's not a melee build for one, right? But we want Marksman's Dodge because we're using Wormhusk, right? Spirit of Wormhusk gives us healing on dodges, right? So we don't want to plan our dodges out to only use them when we're near enemies so that we can get a melee back. We want to use them regularly whenever we're low on health to help us survive, right? Additionally, like to evade enemies, right? Get out of a sticky situation, you can just pop your dodge. You're going to get that healing bump, and you'll notice here that I'm also using Luna's Howl with Heal Clip and Incandescent, but Heal Clip being the important part. So when we do our Marksman's Dodge, we're also going to proc Heal Clip as long as we got a kill with the hand cannon, right? So I mean, we could automatically reload it, or manually reload it, I should say, for Heal Clip, but we can also use Marksman's Dodge. And because we're using Wormhusk, we want to make our class ability spammable. So yes, Marksman's Dodge is a shorter cooldown than Gambler's Dodge, so that's another reason why it makes sense to use here. But also we're using Facet of Hope, I believe it is, which is a fragment. It's a prismatic fragment that gives you, I don't know what the rate is, it's probably like 300 or 400% class ability regen that you get from just having any elemental buff, right? So because I've got Frost Armor pretty much at my disposal anytime I need it, right? Just throw Duskfield down and then I can get Frost Armor. Then it means that Facet of Hope is going to be procced and my dodge is going to come back very quickly, right? So this is how I'm playing into Worm Husk and Renewal. Is I use my Worm Husk, or I use my Renewal to give myself Frost Armor to proc Facet of Hope, so that I can spam my dodge, so that I can get heals, right? And not only that, but when I dodge, I'm also going to apply slow, right? So, and if an enemy is in my dusk field or near my dusk field and they've taken some slow stacks from it, I just have to do a dodge, and then all of a sudden they're frozen. Like, you can freeze enemies very fast. Look at this. I just love this combination here. I didn't need to pop Transcendence on that Overload, but I figured why not. Just throw a Dragon's Breath at it, throw a bunch of grenades, just annihilate it, right? So yeah, the ability spam is very good on this build. A couple other things. Let's see, Facet of Courage and Protection. So 2 fragments here, they're not specific to this build, but I figured I'd mention here because I didn't mention them in the Warlock breakdown, but Facet of Courage and Protection are pretty much going to be in all my loadouts all the time, right? So I don't really feel like I need to specify that. It's just Facet of Protection. It gives you damage resistance. We're doing endgame content. It's GM, so obviously you want to use is something that gives you a static damage resist buff like that for basically doing nothing, right? You just near enemies, you get, I think, up to 25% extra DR, and while you're Transcendent, you get even more damage resistance, right? So having Facet of Protection kind of allows your Transcendence to become like a roaming super, like almost similar to the damage resistance you would get during a roaming super. So it's very good to have. And then Facet of Courage is just kind of the no-brainer for any ability, any abilities that you're using. If you're using light abilities, whether it's your super, your grenades, your melee, if you can apply a darkness debuff to any enemy, then those light abilities do 10% more damage. So it's just kind of a no-brainer. Figure out a way to apply a darkness debuff. Look, right now the boss is severed, so it's a darkness debuff. I can slow it with my dodge. I can throw a Withering Blade. I can throw my super. And then my Gunpowder Gamble is going to do more damage, right? So this is just another staple fragment that's on pretty much all my builds. So yeah, a couple other things about the build here. Critical Anomaly. So this is the Raid Sniper. Very good. I actually spent some Deep Sight Harmonizers to get it, even before we got sniper rifles in the artifact, because it's an awesome sniper rifle. It has chill clip, which means that it basically functions like a utility sniper, like Deliverance, like a fusion rifle, to automatically stun overloads on 1 shot, or freeze unstoppables on 2 shots, and then the shatter stuns unstops, right? So it's a double champion stunning weapon, right? And it being an aggressive frame sniper means that it's actually doing quite a lot of damage, right? It also means that we've only got 3 in the mag, so it means that the majority of all of our shots are going to be applying slow, and then build up to a freeze very fast. And I'm actually pairing it with Explosive Payload, which I know it conflicts with some precision damage, but having Explosive Payload on Chill Clip specifically is good because it means that you don't have to hit the enemy. I mean, hitting them precision is great, but even if you miss the enemy or you body them, like, you're gonna do an AoE chill clip effect, so you can actually slow and freeze multiple enemies with 1 sniper shot, which is pretty cool. And then Luna's Howl here, heal clip, incandescent. This is just one of the brave weapons. It's very good. I've got like a max reload. It's basically a 5 out of 5, so it does quite a bit here. Anyways, that's it for the Hunter, so we'll go into Titan next. Alright, so last but not least, I've got my Prismatic Titan build here, and it's pretty vanilla. That's why I saved it for last, because we're using Frenzied Blades, we're using Consecration. Super original, I know. However, I guess the one unique thing about this build is that we're using Stoicism with Inmost Light and Spirit of Contact, not Spirit of Synthos, and the reason for this is because I didn't want to use an overload weapon. Instead, I'm just going to use my ability spam, such as my grenades, right? Because we're using Dominance with our pulse grenades. For that matter, you can also use suppressor grenades to stun overload champions. But Spirit of Contact is going to allow us to apply Jolt on melee hits with Frenzied Blade or with Consecration. And so because Inmost Light is allowing us to get a ton of ability energy, right? Because essentially we have 4 abilities plus our thruster, so 5 abilities at our disposal, pretty much available every few seconds, right? Because we've got 3 of these, we got 1 of these, 1 of these. And so yeah, Inmost Light is just going to be proccing all the time, right? So this is very good for Inmost Light. And then Spirit of Contact, allowing us to jolt on those melee hits. It just means that, like I said, I don't have to use an overload weapon. I could just ability spam to stun overloads, clear rooms because of the AoE and the jolt, which is fun, right? So I'm using Risk Runner here because there's a lot of arc damage. The boss deals arc damage. We've got arc threat, so we take 25% more damage from arc sources. So Risk Runner is pretty nice for that. And on top of that, we've got anti-barrier SMGs. So for once, we can actually use Risk Runner to break barriers, right? So pretty nice there. And then I can use other weapons like the Pro Memoria and the Call for Strand to build up my darkness meter on my Transcendence fast, right? I mean, that's basically the concept behind this build, so I'll talk a little bit more about it in the game. All right, so one of the things that I can say, if you're running Spirit of Inmost Light or Heart of Inmost Light, an ability spam build like this, you want to get the mentality out of your head where you feel like you need to save your abilities for just the right target, because that's the wrong way to play Inmost Light. You want to spam your abilities as much as possible, even if it means that you're wasting like a very valuable seeming grenade on a bunch of red bar ads. You want to do it so that you can actually get all of your abilities faster, right? You're going to be able to spam more abilities by using your abilities, right? So you got to get that mentality fixed first. And like I said on the build screen there, we've got 3 Frenzied Blades, we've got a Pulse Grenade, we've got a Thruster Dodge on a very fast cooldown. There's absolutely no reason to not be able to use an ability every few seconds, right? So you want to be doing that. One of the things that I could say about the weapons here, you'll notice I'm using double Dealer's Choice weapons because there's actually an artifact mod in the seasonal artifact that allows these all Dealer's Choice origin trait weapons to have it gives them the overcharged weapons buff, right? So any activities that we do with overcharged weapons, it means that they're always going to have 25% extra damage. Which is good. So it means that even like in this week we've got Solar and Arc as the elemental surges, I can use strand weapons and have that same surge, right? And this is very good for this build specifically because basically all my abilities are light based, right? So Consecration is obviously solar, so that's light damage. My Pulse Grenade is arc, so that's light damage. I'm using T-Crash for light damage. So it means that I need some type of darkness damage so that I can build up my Transcendence, right? And I know that there's fragments that you can use, like if you get light-based kills, you can build up your darkness meter, but I don't like the idea of any of those fragments. It's basically the entire top row of fragments. If you look at all the fragments, like the first 8 or 9 of them, or 7 or 8 of them, or something like that. They're all like based around building up your Transcendence, but you don't have to use any of them because you can just use dark and light damage types, right? And then that opens up your build to actually use valuable fragments instead of ones that just go towards Transcendence, with the exception of Facet of I think it's Facet of Grace, right? The one that I was using on my Prismatic Warlock build with Necrotic Grips, because obviously you're focused on a kinetic weapon. So unless you're heavily focused on a kinetic weapon, then I would just make sure that you're using light and dark damage types fairly proportionally. So in this case, my abilities are light and I'm spamming my abilities, right? And then so I'm just making sure that most of the weapon damage that I'm doing is dark, right? So the Call is obviously doing a lot of damage. It's an add clear weapon. Pro Memoria, same thing. And then Risk Runner is primarily there just for breaking barrier shields and for arc damage resistance, right? Right, and speaking of resistance, we can talk a little bit about the survivability of the build. So obviously, outside of Risk Runner, we've got, I think we're picking up Orbs of Power here for recuperation, so a little bit of healing back, but we're also using Knockout, so basically every time we land a Consecration and get a kill, we're getting a Cure style of heal from our melee kills, right? So Knockout is very good for that. On top of that, we're getting Amplified, so we can make use of Galvanic Armor from the Seasonal Artifact for even more damage resist. And then additionally, I'm using Sever, right? So that means that any type of precision damage that I do is going to sever the enemy, which means that I take 40% less damage to them, right? And if there's any situation where I think that survivability is an issue, then I could just use my thruster dodge to try and get out of there. Maybe I'm amplified, I can run really fast. I could pop Transcendence, benefit from Facet of Protection, the extra DR there. So there's lots of ways that we can get around it. Plus, if you're Transcendence, then you could just ability spam. And if you're ability spamming, you're spamming Consecration, you're proccing Knockout constantly, you're getting amplified, right? So it's actually very good. Yeah, so Spirit of Contact here is definitely the highlight for me. I mean, Inmost Light is obviously very good, but I just thought it was very cool to use Spirit of Contact because it's just, no matter what you do, you're just jolting everything, and with there being so many Overload champions in this, like it's perfect. So the build is tailored to Overload champions essentially, right? You don't need an Overload weapon, you just need abilities. And then every now and then you get like 3 overloads paired up here. Well, it's just jolt them all at the same time, stun everything, yeah. And your Transcendent Grenade is also applying jolt, so yeah, it's fun. It's definitely fun. I just haven't covered this build a lot on the channel because it's, you know, it's been the main build since day one. And if you really want to watch gameplay involving this build, there's all kinds of like world record speedrunners out there that you can go and watch, and it's nuts. It's nuts what this build can do.